Welcome back, Daisy Cakes, or hello for the first time. If you don't know, I've curated 2 lists of speculative fiction, a top 100 science fiction authors list, and a top 100 fantasy author list. And I'm releasing them in alphabetical order in groups of 10. Why? Because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Now, these lists include authors who write adult books and those who write children's books, authors who are contemporary, and authors who are pioneers of their genres. Basically, we're going for a very eclectic list, and this is part 2 of my top 100 fantasy authors. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll have a link up here. So without further ado, let's get started. Continuing with the B's, I have one of the most famous children's authors of all time, and that is L. Frank Baum, also known as the Royal Historian of Oz, who wrote, of course, the iconic children's fantasy novel, The Wizard of Oz, in 1900. He was born in 1856 and died in 1919 at the age of 62. I am sure you have all seen the 1939 Judy Garland movie, but have you read the books? Now, I don't remember reading the Oz books as a child. I do remember seeing a set of them. There are 14 Oz books in total on the library shelf in my elementary school. But I did read them then, or I don't remember reading them then, but I did read them as an adult, and they do hold up. Though they do read really, really young. I was pretty surprised that there was a whole storyline on what sounded like a transgender fairy tale. Ozma is a princess who was, as a baby, transformed into a boy named Tip to hide her from her enemies. Tip then transforms back into a girl as a teenager, becoming her true self. Some of the stories are really creepy and imaginative, like living porcelain dolls who are very fragile and can break, or a princess who can change her head. She has a collection of 20 heads that she can swap out with her own to change her face. These are interesting stories that have inspired many fantasy authors, notably, of course, Gregory Maguire, who wrote Wicked, which was adapted to a musical. Frank L. Baum himself was a notable supporter of the women's suffrage movement, but may have advocated for the genocide of American Indians. So there is a dark side in the land of Oz. The next author on the list is also known as a children's author, and that is John Bellairs, born in 1938 and died fairly young at the age of 53. He wrote the Louis Barnevelt series that starts with The House with the Clock in its Walls, published in 1973. And I've read his children's books, and they are fun and they hold up. But today, I want to talk about his adult book, just one. The Face in the Frost, published in 1969, which was written after Bellairs read Lord of the Rings. The novel wasn't that successful at the time. It certainly didn't take off like his children's books, but if it did, maybe Bellairs would have written more adult books. I don't know. But those who did read The Face in the Frost loved it, including a guy called Gary Gygax. Gygax is, of course, the creator of Dungeons and Dragons and had his book listed in the Dungeon Master's Guide as recommended reading, which is how I came to it. But it was also recommended by Ursula K. Le Guin, who said it was an authentic fantasy by a writer who knows what wizardry is all about. Also, Lynn Carter said it was one of only 3 best fantasy novels to be published after Lord of the Rings. I think Bellairs must have really been taken by Gandalf when he read Lord of the Rings, because The Face in the Frost is all about 2 wizards, one named Prospero, not the one you're thinking about, and Roger Bacon. And they're not young. They're 2 old guys. Not your usual main character fare. Unfortunately, their idyllic, peaceful lives are interrupted with the return of Melicus, an old rival and very evil wizard. There's something fairy tale-like and whimsical about his writing style, which would later serve him well when he wrote children's books, but it makes The Face in the Frost a unique and charming read. We're now going to do a 180-degree turn, because the furthest thing from charming and whimsical may come from Anne Bishop, the next author on the list, born in 1955, maybe, who made a big splash with her dark fantasy series, the Dark Jewels trilogy, which started with Daughter of Blood, published in 1998, and continues with Heir to the Shadows and ends with Queen of Darkness. I think the trilogy is really fun, and the world building is kind of brilliant because the story takes place in hell, sort of. Anyway, it's a hellish universe or dimension called the Dark Realm, and there are a lot of demons and devils and witches involved in all sorts of politics and shenanigans. A girl is born named Janelle, who is destined to overthrow Satan, the High Lord of Hell. At least that's a prophecy, if she lives to see adulthood. Now, there are trigger warnings galore in this book. So if that's a concern, look it up on Storygraph or somewhere like that. I also think it's interesting how the book covers have evolved, because it was definitely marketed to the fantasy or dark fantasy crowd, not afraid of graphic sex or violence, but now seems to be geared more to readers of romantasy, which is interesting. Either way, if you are not a squeamish reader, I recommend the Dark Jewels trilogy, though it has also been described as trashy. Moving right along, we come to Peter V. Brett, born 1973. I absolutely love the Demon Cycle series, which starts with The Warded Man, published in 2009. Now, I didn't know this until I started looking it up, but this book was published a year earlier in the UK as The Painted Man. I think The Warded Man sounds better. Sorry, UK. There are 5 books in the series, and I would call it a dark fantasy. It's set in a world with humans, but every night demons invade from another dimension. And the demons hunt humans and cause a lot of destruction and mayhem and all that evil jazz. However, there are wards that can repel demons, and our main character, Arlen Bales, decides to learn more about wards and how to fight demons. If you like magic systems like Brandon Sanderson creates, I think you would really like the system of wards. Not to mention, the world building here is top-notch. Next, we move on to Kristen Britain, born in 1965. Her debut novel, The Green Rider, was published in 1998, and which I became obsessed with. I couldn't wait for the next one in the series. She wrote The Green Rider while she worked as a park ranger in Arcadia National Park, which was the inspiration for the setting of her novels. The story feels as though it was inspired by Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar books. I don't know if that's true or not, but just felt like that to me when I read it. It's about a woman named Kerrigan, a merchant's daughter who runs away after she is kicked out of school and eventually becomes a Green Rider. Green Riders are messengers to the king. It turns out the horses they use are more than they seem, and the Green Riders are more than they seem. It has a really great plot, really likable characters, really engaging writing. What's not to love about Kristen Britain's screenwriter series. We're going to have to talk a little bit about fantasy history for the next author on the list because it is Terry Brooks, born in 1944 and worked as an attorney until he published The Sword of Shannara in 1977. Now, why I say we have to talk about fantasy history, it's because I think Sword of Shannara jump-started a fantasy renaissance because there were not that many fantasy books other than Lord of the Rings prior to 1977. In fact, Lord of the Rings pretty much constituted the fantasy books of any note. Of course, I'm kind of lying about that, but it's to make a point. Sword of Shannara, when it came out, was heralded as the second coming of Lord of the Rings. There were posters all over Walden Books, gorgeous artwork by the brothers Hildebrandt. It showed the return of elves and dwarves and wizards, this time called druids. I swear I remember this enormous marketing push when it came up, and of course I was caught up in it, and I had to get a copy as soon as it came out, and I absolutely loved it. It's really interesting because the twist of Shannara is that it is on the ruins of a civilization, maybe that was contemporary Earth, because there's artifacts of technology that very occasionally pop up. But the trilogy is massive, and there are a whole bunch of other books in the world of Shannara, so it may be a little overwhelming to get started in. So I'm actually going to recommend a much lighter and fun book, Magic Kingdom For Sale Sold, published in 1986. This is the first in the Landover series, but I think you can read this as a standalone. It's a portal fantasy about a lawyer, remember Brooks started as a lawyer, named Ben Holiday, who sees an advertisement selling a Magic Kingdom for $1 million. He thinks it's probably a joke, but he's desperate and his life is in shambles and he ends up buying it. And sure enough, he gets a magic medallion that transports him to Landover. This is a much more whimsical and I think much more fun book than Shannara, and it's a great introduction to Terry Brooks. We now come to Stephen Brust, born in 1955, whose Vlad Teltos novels are amazing, starting with the first one, Jerrig, published in 1983. Brust has been writing the series ever since. As a matter of fact, the 17th novel, Liorn, was published just a few months ago in April 2024. Now, I hear you groaning when you hear 17 novels in a series, but hear me out. First, I haven't read all 17 of the novels, and I'm still recommending them, but second, they also read as standalones. There may be some vague story continuity between the novels, but each one is its own story. Heck, you could read them out of order, and I don't think you'd miss much, because they read like hard-boiled detective novels. And our main character is a hard-boiled man named Vlad Teltos, and he has bonded with a magical little mini dragon named Jerrig, and they solve mysteries in this world where there are bloodthirsty family houses that are run kind of like the mafia, and they compete with each other, and there's all sorts of intrigue and plots and counterplots and so on. Now, since the Vlad Teltos novels have been published over a 40-year period, it's interesting to watch the writing style of Stephen Brust grow and change as he grew and changed as a writer and a person. Anyway, these are short, super fun stories, and if you're like me, you may find yourself going through them like popcorn. I found this next author through Shelve It or Shove It, where I pick books based solely on their covers because it was an odd cover. I am talking about Hollow Kingdom by Kira Jane Buxton, which was published in 2019. It was a finalist in the 2020 Thurber Prize and was ranked 53 in the top 60 books of 2019 by Good Housekeeping. It's kind of a cross between Watership Down and The Walking Dead. Seriously, hear me out. It's about the zombie apocalypse where all humans turn into zombies, but the animals do not. So it's told from the point of view of one of those animals, who is a pet crow, or was a pet crow, whose owner named him Shit Turd, or ST for short. The crow is cranky, sarcastic, lives up to his name, and doesn't know how to be a wild creature because he was raised as a domesticated pet, along with another domesticated pet, a hound dog named Dennis. I know a novel from an animal POV is kind of a strong ask for adult readers, but I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed by this funny and strangely moving book about a crow named Shit Turd. The next author got a very late start in his writing career. I'm talking about Kacen Callender, who was born in 1930 and died in 2008. His first novel, Pyromancer, wasn't published until 1994 when he was 62, which kind of gives hope to those of us trying to get a late start in a second career. Pyromancer is the first novel in his Mancer series, which continues with Aquamancer, Geomancer, Aeromancer. I'll be perfectly honest with you, these aren't very deep books, but I think they're fun books. They're very fast reads that tread familiar tropes. Pyromancer is about Douglas Brightblade, who becomes an apprentice to Flarman Flowerstock and eventually must battle the Ice King. It was recommended by Piers Anthony, and it's the type of book that probably would really appeal to readers of Xanth. They're light, they're funny, they're fun. Rounding out this list of 10 authors, we have another Callander. This one is Kacen Callender, who is no relation to Don Callander. At least if they are, I'll be shocked. Kacen Callender is mostly known for their juvenile books about LGBTQI characters, notably Hurricane Child and Felix Ever After, but I want to talk about their fantasy adult novel, Queen of the Conquered, published in 2019, which won the World Fantasy Award. This is one of those books that came completely out of left field, as it is an anti-hero book and a tragedy, and ultimately a fascinating read. The setting is inspired by colonial-era Caribbean islands, where white colonists have enslaved the Black indigenous population. The twist here is that some people are born with magic or have these psychic powers. The white colonists want to be the only ones with power, so they hunt down Black people that show signs of this magic, except for Sigourney Rose, who is a Black woman and a powerful psychic, but she's also part of the system. She's part of the power structure, and she owns Black slaves herself. You are not really meant to like Sigourney. And I know some people have a big problem with anti-hero characters or characters that aren't very likable or even redeemable, but I think Queen of the Conquered is brilliant and nuanced and deep. Now, there is a sequel, King of the Rising, which I hated. I do not recommend that one unless you're a masochistic reader who loves extreme tragedy, but as a standalone, I highly recommend Queen of the Conquered. So that was round two. Round two, part two. Part two of my list of top 100 fantasy authors. Let me know what you think of these authors down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.